On today's episode of Back and Brew, I'm so excited to welcome Dr. Kate Sage, an orthopedic surgeon specializing in foot and ankle, who then transitioned her career to working for Kuros Biosciences, a revolutionary biologic company that mainly sells into spine. Not only is Dr. Kate Sage an active orthopedic surgeon, but she also understands the research of the products that she sells. I can't wait for you to hear this episode. This is Back and Brew. Dr. Kate Sage, thanks for coming on Back and Brew today. You are not a spine surgeon, but you are a surgeon and you do work in spine. So kind of tell me how those two things come together.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here today. So I'm a board certified licensed orthopedic surgeon. I did a fellowship in foot and ankle, and I was working up until COVID. Just have a regular foot and ankle, very elective surgical practice. And then we were pretty shut down in Michigan. So I live in Michigan. We were hit pretty hard by COVID. And I spent a lot of the summer of 2020 trying to just find something to do. I was more bored than anything. And ultimately, I ended up sort of passing my resume to this woman who knew a board member at Kuros, who passed it on to somebody who was sitting in the European office. And I just started working for Kuros Biosciences, and I loved it. I was so happy. I thought it was so fun. I liked working for a science-based company. I liked what they were doing in the biologics world. I was really interested in their products. And so ultimately by April of 2021, I had quit my clinical practice, and I was working for Kuros Biosciences full-time.
All right. And Kuros makes a biologic that goes into spine.
Yes.
Awesome. So we checked the back box. So now let's go to the brew. You said you're from Michigan.
Yes.
And we'll come back to the spine, but you said you're from Michigan, and you brought a beer from Michigan from Founders. Tell me a little bit about this.
Okay, so born and raised in Grand Rapids, Michigan, which is where I live now. I did leave a bit, but now I'm like one of those people who lives a mile from where I grew up. And Founders is a brewery that is based in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And so it's been there since I was like a baby 21-year-old showing up at the brewery. But it's really grown and become kind of this large brewery in Grand Rapids. And I brought one of their more famous beers called their Kentucky Breakfast Stout. And so this is one that I think a lot of people enjoy, and I see a lot of people drinking it. I wouldn't say it's my favorite because it's at kind of a high alcohol volume, and it's also a little darker than I tend to like, but it's a crowd pleaser, and so I brought it. And Founders is just like a staple of my life in Grand Rapids. My daughter Lucy learned to walk there, actually, so it's one of those places in my heart.
It's funny as an adult, as a parent, I should say, how like when you look and evaluate places to take your kids to do anything, whether it's eat or whatever, you always look at like the ease of use and like how big it is, how far the tables are spaced apart. Can you fit a stroller in there? Breweries actually have a fair amount of space to have kids, which is funny.
And a big outdoor area, and it's always fenced in. So great place to hang out with a family. Great place to learn to walk.
All right, well, I'm gonna crack it open.
Yeah.
And how many kids do you have?
I have two. I have two girls, a 9-year-old and a 6-year-old.
9-year-old and a 6-year-old.
Yep.
And so the 9-year-old or the 6-year-old learned to walk.
The 6-year-old did. Yep.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, and she was running around like crazy, really enjoying herself.
Okay. All right. That's funny. I was at a brewery in Wyoming, and they had this, like, I think he's probably like 5 or 6, but same thing. Like he was the brewmaster's kid.
Yeah.
And his name, and it was like, you know how like some kids now, they all have like old names, and this kid's old name was Brooks. And I'm like,
Love
it's like a elderly man name for a 6-year-old.
Hanging out at a brewery.
Yeah.
All right. Well, cheers.
All right. Cheers.
What do you think?
That is heavy. That is really good. So it's 12% volume, right? Or 12% alcohol by volume.
Can taste some chocolate, some coffee.
Yeah, you get a lot of chocolate in that. That's really good.
It's, I don't know anything about beer making, but I guess they keep it in like a bourbon barrel for a year. So it's kind of like a really slow to make beer. And
I can actually get the bourbon off of it. Like I absolutely love bourbon.
It's just the alcohol.
That's what it is. It's just hot.
It's just
no, it's like very much a sippable
burning
beer. Yeah. This isn't like going and getting like a Montucky cold snack or like, one of the lighter ones. Like this is definitely, you could chew through this thing.
Yeah.
But
this is Founders.
It's really good. Yeah.
Picked it up at Bevy's where there actually is quite an array of Michigan beer. They had a lot of Founders products. Then they also there's a brewery called Bell's in Kalamazoo, Michigan. And so they had a lot of their beers as well.
So
I didn't know which one to bring.
I always find it interesting that the places that have really extreme weather usually have really good food and really good drinks.
Yeah.
And like, it must be, again, I haven't been to Michigan. It's one of the few states I haven't been to, but this is absolutely wonderful. Like, this is actually really good. And for a lot of times the dark beers, I'm like, oh man, this is going to be really peaty and like kind of like almost like a carbonated Lafroig or something like that. This is actually really flavorful. Like, it just tastes like really dark chocolate.
I agree. Yeah. I mean, yes, it is a nice beer. People do love this beer.
Yeah, that's awesome. You know what's interesting is I feel like in healthcare in general, I get some of the best recommendations for different types of drinks, like whatever it is. And I don't know what it is, but maybe it's because all the meetings we go to, it's like, oh, you got to travel all the time. You're going to end up having these meetings somewhere. You might as well.
Yeah, you go for the local. You have to.
Oh, absolutely. So tell me about Michigan. So you grew up in Michigan, and then you said you left for a little while. Where'd you go?
I did, yeah. I grew up in Michigan in Grand Rapids, and then I went to college in Boston at Boston University, went to medical school in Tennessee, and then I went back to Grand Rapids for my residency, left for a year to Baltimore to do my foot and ankle fellowship, and then ended up back in Grand Rapids. So I did leave. I was gone for 10-ish years before Pure Michigan called me back.
It's interesting that, especially now, like you had your kids outside of Michigan. You had one outside.
I had one in residency, in Grand Rapids. And then, no, both of them. I was pregnant during my fellowship year. So
because you needed more to do, obviously.
Yeah, exactly.
That sounds about right.
It's hard. You have to time it. You got to time it just right. Otherwise, you're missing work, missing residency, missing fellowship. So I finished my fellowship in August, and then she was born in September. And then she learned to walk at Founders a year later.
That had to be, and I'm not saying this in a bad way, but seem almost isolating, I would assume, because I'm assuming there weren't too many other residents that were, one, female, and two, obviously pregnant.
Yeah. No, I can't think of, there was one other female resident I knew that was pregnant during residency. But overall, people were really supportive. I didn't get any real negative backlash. Everyone always made sure I had lead on and was, really helpful, especially in those later stages of pregnancy when you're standing for a long time and, I don't know, belly bumping into things.
Yeah, and it's not like a residency is known for not having to stand for a long time or not having to work very much. So that's just absolutely astonishing that, like, I'm always amazed by, like, the moms in healthcare.
Yeah, I mean, I hope it just continues to become more normalized. I think the more women that are in medicine, and especially in some of these more male-dominated fields, like, orthopedics or neurosurgery, I hope that just the more women that go into them can just kind of normalize it, having a family and being pregnant and working through it, or not, if that's not what works for them. And then, residents and attendings and junior residents and senior residents can all kind of get used to the concept. And I don't know, maybe in 10 years we wouldn't have to have this conversation, but no, for now it definitely wasn't the norm. And I think, hopefully some of the younger residents were not inspired, but hopefully they felt free to have a kid if they wanted to.
We see a lot of, and I think it is unfortunate that we see a lot of, we don't see, let me go back. We don't see a lot of women in healthcare in terms of being physicians or surgeons, but the ones that we do, there are a lot of them that are like, I kind of put my life on hold, and then they'll be 40 something years old and they're like, now what do I do? Like, do I try to have kids now? Like, and you can tell that there's sometimes some regret in it. So I really think that's admirable to have that, is like, to be able, for someone to be able to see you go through it in the thick of it and still be able to get through it. Like, that seems like that you must have had a great support system as well.
Thank you. Yeah. I mean, there is a study out actually that looked at female orthopedic surgeons and then looked specifically at family planning. And they found that more women in orthopedic surgery had to use methods like in vitro to get pregnant, with the thought that probably it was because they had to wait a bit longer. And then because of that, there's more women that have multiples that are like orthopedic surgeons that are female. So it's kind of this like sort of second step of like lots of twins and orthopedic surgery moms.
Because of in vitro, that makes sense. Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of the thought, but I don't know that they have a pure cause and effect for all of that, but
so
it's published.
So you interact with spine surgeons constantly, right?
Yep.
There you go. So you're constantly having dinners with them, having these high-level clinical discussions with them. And I really like that about Kuros, that they leverage someone who's not just a PhD, but they leverage someone who's actually in the OR and has had to deal with the handling of a product or its actual applicable use, to be able to come in and speak to it. So your job in general is usually to come in as a consultant kind of and have these conversations with spine surgeons.
Yeah.
Is that kind of...
Yeah, spine and general orthopedic, and neuro spine surgeons and ortho spine surgeons and general orthopedic surgeons. Absolutely. It is funny that you say that though, because I have to temper myself a little bit, because oftentimes surgeons will bring up products and, I have my own personal experience with them about, how they handled or how my patients did, or sometimes I feel like now I have a lot more knowledge of the literature than I did probably as an attending. And also I think there's been a lot more published since I have come into this role. I think biologics companies in general are publishing more and better data on their biologic products. So I do sometimes feel like I'm very comfortable giving my opinion, but other times I'm in situations where I really just have to stick to the literature. Like my opinion doesn't matter. And so it's one of those situations, just feeling it out, making sure that I'm covering what the surgeon wants to cover. But other times I just love commiserating about like some product that's off the market now that like we all hated, like no one could figure out, or like think back on it. Or otherwise we're like, yeah, like everyone loved this. Like, where did it go? What happened to this?
And that's like, honestly, the knowledge you have, again, from just going through so much education and clinical experience with products. There are so many biologics. And whenever, as a sales rep, if I bring up biologics to a surgeon, I know that's the snooze right there. That is, I don't want to hear it. It's all the same.
Yeah.
So being able to go in as a surgeon and speak to other surgeons with clinical experience on a product that is a biologic, and you saying, well, wait, this is what I like about it in my practice.
Yep.
Has to be an edge.
I think so. I mean, I think it definitely gives me some credibility to know that I've been in the OR, that I, went through the same residency or one that was somewhat similar maybe to the neuro team. I think it helps. But still, I'm not facing all of the exact same challenges, but you're right. I do like to go in and be able to have a conversation that on some level, we're on the same team and I've been where they've been, or am where they are, or.
Yeah. So you still are operating?
Not as much as I was. I have quit my private practice. So I'm with Kuros full times. I am still board certified and licensed, and pick up locum shifts, just kind of general ortho, bread and butter cases, level 3 trauma, which is super fun. I mean, it's nailing hips, distal radius fractures, bimals, but not a full-time practice like most of the surgeons I interact with.
It's so funny. You just kind of minimize, nailing a hip, slamming gammas into grandmas.
That's like the best.
Yeah, I barely do it.
But those are cases that like are so fun to do, and we've all done so many of them. And again, it's a level 3 trauma, so anything like really bad gets sent off to a level 1. And yeah, it's fun. It's fun to do general orthopedic trauma. I mean, I think that's why a lot of us went into it. Well,
and that's really cool too, because you don't have, and maybe I'm completely wrong, like Chandler, that is actually a bold-faced lie, but it seems like you may not have to sacrifice as much for your, give up time for your family as if you were, the full on, hey, I'm taking call all the time. Because I even know at like one of the level 2 trauma centers here, I'm buddies with some of the orthopedic surgeons there, and they're like, yeah, this is terrible.
Yeah, I think the time that I have now is more predictable. So, for example, I can kind of choose when I want to take my call shifts and doing my locums, or I can choose when I want to travel or meet with people. My job now is really different. I don't schedule early morning meetings, so like I get to walk my kids to school in the morning. Or I can schedule, I never was able to schedule around kind of the middle of the day, like school production of the play or whatever. And now I can do things like that. So it's still busy. I still work a lot. And I still work weekends and I still work nights and I work early mornings, but it's far more manageable in terms of like me being able to control the schedule a little bit and planning farther ahead. So that's helpful around the house as well.
It's funny, like I will, after a late case on a Tuesday or Thursday, we usually have late cases on Tuesday and Thursday. So I just X those out from like, I'm not going to be the person that puts the kids to bed that day, right? So like a surgeon will be like, well, I don't know, can you stay out like a little bit late? You want to go grab a beer after a case or something like that? Yeah. And I'm like, whether I get home now or 2 a.m., it doesn't matter on Tuesday, Thursday.
Yep.
Now, that being said, on Mondays, Wednesdays, my kids do jujitsu and I'm like, I want to take them.
I want to be there. Yeah.
I want to be there. And so I'll miss it sometimes, but for the most part, I'm like, I got to figure out a way to be there.
Yeah, it's nice to have a balance, right? I mean, you got to work when you need to work and be with the family when it's time to be with the family.
Do you feel like it's like a cultural shift to prioritize that now, or?
I think yes. I think that I sit in like the middle of a couple of generations, like one of which wants to work all the time and one of like which really prioritizes, work-life balance. And so hopefully I'm kind of like able to work with, both sides. But I would say maybe it's just because I like did the medical school and the orthopedic surgery residency and everything. I would say I tended, it's hard for me to not work. It's easier for me to like give up on family, but I have to work really hard not to do that.
I totally get that. So if you go on vacation and the vacation's any longer than 3 days, do you ever get tempted? You're like,
Oh, no, I have to delete my email off my phone. And because otherwise I'll like check it and respond. Or if people message me when I'm on vacation, I have to say like, I will be back Monday and like not answer, even though I really want to answer, but I have to kind of force myself.
I get it. So why Kuros? Like obviously that was one that like happenstance opportunity came up.
Yeah.
But now you've been in it long enough. You understand everything, someone like you who has the clinical experience of multiple products and you're very articulate and you present well in front of customers.
Thank you.
Why Kuros? Like there are tons of biologics that
I love Kuros. And so yes, it was an opportunity.
Am I saying it wrong when I say Kuros?
No, you're saying Kuros, os like ossify. But
got it. I was thinking like the Greek, like some weird Greek
like some
way of
god
saying
of
Kuros.
something.
Yeah, I'm like, Kuros.
The god of bone healing from the ancient Greek mythology, obviously.
Naturally.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It was an opportunity for sure, but I wouldn't have just joined kind of any company. And so what I really liked about Kuros early on was that it was founded by a team of scientists. It was very dedicated to research and science. Like this is a company that has been figuring out and discovering and determining its mechanism of action for far, far longer than the company's been around or incorporated. So the PhD that founded it, I was kind of explaining this earlier, but the PhD that was... I'm not supposed to say that, am I? We didn't talk about anything earlier. We have never met until right now.
I actually don't know the story, so
okay.
Go ahead.
So the PhD that founded Kuros had been working in bone grafts for like many, many, many years, and he had worked on various sides of it. So working with calcium phosphates, working with cellular-based bone grafts. And at one point, he kind of discovered that there was one bone graft that was growing bone in a soft tissue pouch. And so he really wanted to figure out why that bone graft could grow bone even when it wasn't sitting on a bony fusion bed. And so he tells this story so well, like long story of just trial and error and true scientific discovery. And even like an autoclave that I don't know if it malfunctioned or if they said it wrong, but it kind of had like too much humidity in it. And ultimately realized that the surface topography of a bone graft could really make an impact on inducing bone to grow. And so this whole story, along with the benchtop science, the preclinical data, and then the clinical data that came with it, and as well as sort of all the ideas that are in the background of the company, the things that they're thinking of that are so different than other companies. Like this isn't a biologics company that's like, yeah, we have some chips. Yeah, we have some cell-based. Like, yeah, we have a DBM. Like, yeah, we have a synthetic. this is a company that's really thinking differently. Like that we don't have all of that. We're thinking about new things and different things and new ways to grow bone, like a surface topography, a material that can influence how a body responds. That's really what drew me to Kuros. And again, it is such a science-based company. We've grown a lot, but when I joined, it was something like 18% of people on staff were either orthopedic surgeons or PhDs. So really grounded in science. And I don't think it's quite that high of a number anymore just because we've hired so many more people as we've grown. But
absolutely, you have to have a support staff to do that.
Yep.
So there are tons of synthetics coming into the market because, and again, this is from my low-level knuckle dragging distributor vision of it or perspective of it, that it's low cost to make and high margin.
Yeah.
What makes Kuros's technology different than the countless products that are out there?
Yeah, so Magnetos is the flagship product, and what's different about Magnetos is the surface topography on the Magnetos granules itself. So our PhD founder at one point found that a surface topography that was submicron in size and needle-shaped in structure could polarize macrophages into an M2 macrophage phenotype. An M2 macrophage is a pro-healing phenotype. It can release proteins like BMP2 or osteoactivin, and then that in turn will signal to any mesenchymal stem cell that's in the area to differentiate into an osteoblast and start laying down osteoid. So it's not so much what it's composed of or made of, it's what the surface features of it look like. And this is kind of similar to some of the hardware companies that at the same time as this was being developed, they were developing hardware that had surface topography that was known to allow for bony ingrowth, creating osteoclastic pits, allowing the body to respond to the material and start to grow bone or help induce bone.
So the geometric shape of the product is kind of what's activating a reaction that will lead to an osteoblast?
Yes.
That's wild. That's really interesting.
We have such good data to support it too. I mean, we have really, really cool studies starting from the benchtop where we had just all these different bone grafts with different surface topographies. And we took human blood, like donor blood out of the arms of Dutch people, and put it on these different surfaces. Well, because
why was it Dutch people? They just
that's
have
where because they're known. Yeah, well, no. So the company is founded in the Netherlands, and that's why. So the lab was in the Netherlands, and it still is. But we didn't buy cells or buy blood, which are oftentimes sort of modified to not die or modified to respond to a certain way on a benchtop. So we wanted to we had ethical approval, obviously, hopefully, obviously, to take blood from people and put it on these different surfaces and see what would happen. And so we were able to sort of trace our mechanism of action all the way through, like putting blood on different surfaces and then adding more mesenchymal stem cells to see what would happen. And then, they differentiated into osteoblasts. And like, okay, cool, this is working on the benchtop. Like, what happens when we put it in an animal model? And we picked big animals, like we did dogs and sheep. We didn't just kind of stick with the rat and mouse model.
It drives me up the wall. I remember there was one company, again, we carry multiple companies, but there was one company, we didn't carry this one at the time, but they put out this press release with and it was like, we have this new study coming out, just wait and see. And we're going to disprove like this other company's bio. And it was a rat study.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that was it. It was
cool,
the
man.
rat study. Yeah. Awesome. Like if I have any rats with stenosis, I know what I'm going to use.
Yeah, exactly.
So they used Kuros chose large animals.
Yeah. So we also did some of the rodent studies, but we have a lot of studies that are using large animal models, and we're still kind of doing them. Like we're still looking at things and tinkering. So there's an ovine study that's happening right now still, hopefully out for publication really soon. And it's just, once again, kind of making sure that we work in these large animal models. You're able to sacrifice these animals and look at histology and really kind of see what's happening in the osteoblastic pathway, which is something that we can then, you can't look at your human patients and go back and get histology later, most of the time. Although I'm trying to get some IRB approval for if there's ever revisions, if we can like take the remnant tissue and look at how many osteoblasts are in there. But we're continuing to collect data, again, from relevant animal models, from benchtop studies, and then, we have level 1 clinical data as well. But I loved your point about the rat study, because at one point, we gained an additional clearance for an indication, and it's something I knew we were kind of going for with the FDA. And so I had started to just reach out to some surgeons who were using our product in those different indications. And we had gathered some retrospective data with control groups and tried to get independent reviewers so we could publish like a couple nice studies. And then we saw a competitor of ours also got the same indication. It was the exact same thing. I'm like reading their press release and I go to like look for the reference, and the reference is like a rat study. And I was kind of like, gosh, I hope people know to look at what the references actually are when they're trying to compare, which bone graft to use that has the same indication.
I love that idea, but you're hoping that voters know policy,
Yeah, exactly.
And that's the problem. It's biologics would be the hardest thing to sell into, and so that's what's really interesting. And I always enjoy having these conversations with people that are very knowledgeable about it, because you legitimately are interested in that product, like in the science behind that product, not just what that product is or what it does, but the whole mechanism around it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really have become very passionate about bone grafts in general because I think I've recognized how little data there is. I would love, every time a company, like I see a company put on clinicaltrials.gov that they're doing like a level 1 study, I'm like, yes, I cannot wait to read this. I want to see how they do. I want to see what they're comparing to. I want to see how they're designing their studies. Like the more level 1 data out there on biologics, the more data about biologics in general, like I just am so eager to read because I think there's a real void of good data in this space, and I want to see it. Like I am all for any competitor of ours doing any sort of high level study so that we can really find the best thing for our patients. Ultimately, I guess I'm a clinician at heart, and I want to help people.
How dare you? How dare you? So what are you excited about that Kuros has coming up in the future, or maybe it has been recently released? What are you most excited about?
Yeah, so a couple of the things that Kuros does, maybe I sort of alluded to earlier, but making sure we have clearance for things. So every time we see a surgeon using us in a way that can give us some data that we can bring back to the FDA, like we pay for that. We get the clearance. We make sure that the FDA is agreeing with us that we're safe and effective in all these indications. So like all of our products are indicated for posterior lateral fusion, cervical, thoracic, lumbar. They can be used with autograft or not by itself. They can be used by themselves. Same thing for interbody, like ACDFs, like thoracolumbar interbodies, pre and post fill with autograft or not, pelvis and extremities. And so once again, this is something that the company really cares about to make sure that we're, again, showing that we're safe and effective in all these different ways and that we have these really broad indications. Just the idea of materials influencing how a body reacts. It's something that, like I said earlier, we've seen in hardware, we've seen in other industries, but with MagnetOs bone graft, I'm really excited to see what our PhD scientists, like where they can take that next. Like how can the surface of our product be translated into other parts of the body or be modified to, induce other pathways.
That's really interesting. As a spine rep, we constantly get these brochures and like seek to understand the relevance of topography and implants and how it correlates with bony integration, ultimately with fusion. So kind of break that down more for me on how the geometry of Kuros is really changing the pathway or accelerating the pathway of fusion.
Yeah, there's really good evidence that the surface topography of both hardware and bone grafts can influence bony healing. So our founder and our former CEO that was a PhD, and he was working on surface topography of bone grafts at the same time that a lot of PhDs were working on some of the surface topography for cages and hardware. And so they were really working on this sort of not so much in tandem, but kind of discovering the same thing in different surfaces at the same time. And they used each other's research to kind of push forward what they were doing. So there's evidence in hardware of osteoclastic pits and how they can induce bone to form. And at the same time, kind of our scientists were publishing about a submicron needle-shaped surface structure and how, cells were migrating and proliferating based on that structure. So there is really interesting, compelling, strong evidence that has been proven in sort of multiple different subtypes of materials that all kind of point to the same thing, which is that a surface topography can influence bone growth.
Wow. It's kind of off the wall. What is your perspective and of the validity of mesenchymal stem cell products?
You mean products that have mesenchymal stem cells in them?
Or claim to have stem cells in them.
Okay, so there is a lot of data that has shown that it doesn't make a difference. So there's some really nice evidence that shows that those cells die, that they don't outlast the freezing and thawing process. And then there's also some data that shows that there's some products where they intentionally like killed those mesenchymal stem cells in some of the groups and then kept them alive in other groups, and then did some animal studies, and there was no difference in fusion. So I think that those are they don't have as much evidence as people once thought that they could have.
It's really interesting. And again, I you know far more about this than I do, but there was a hospital system here that banned a bunch of other allograft products, but you could use stem cell products, and which were far more expensive than like the regular allograft products.
Yeah. And so today, what is it today? Today is August of 2024. And I saw a headline again today about another tuberculosis outbreak from a contaminated cell line. So, I mean, I think there's a lot of risk with those products that just isn't,
Infused implant. Their study was done. They did a study, or they collected data around a patient population in like Alabama or Arkansas or something like that. It was like fat smokers.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying everyone in Alabama or Arkansas are fat smokers, but they had a large population, larger than like Colorado, for example.
Yep.
And they did a study there where they were like, let's see what happens if there's just that and some autograft in there. Are there any?
Yeah, I mean, so in general, we pick hard study models. So our level 1 study that was just published in Spine was an open up to 6 level posterior lateral fusion model. We had very limited exclusion criteria. So nearly 20% of our of that patient population were current smokers, like nicotine users. So we tend to not sort of like cherry pick who our patients are. And I shouldn't say we, because that was an investigator-led study, but we support that. We're like, no, do a hard up to 6 level open PLF with as many smokers as you have. Like, that's fine. So we do tend to include, the obese, the osteoporotic, the diabetics, as long as the surgeon, we're not going to tell a surgeon to operate on somebody with an A1C that's, way beyond what's appropriate to operate on. But we have a couple of studies that are retrospective studies that are exactly that. They're from parts of the country where, there are a little bit of a sicker patient population that are still getting spinal fusion surgeries. So we don't shy away from that. And it is one thing that we talk about from time to time, that a lot of the patients in our level 1 studies and then our level 3 retrospective studies have high number of comorbidities.
That is absolutely amazing. Where can a surgeon that would be interested in that access that data, those studies?
Yeah, so you can find them on PubMed, but also the easiest place to find everything together is kurosbio.com. And so we have an evidence page that goes through all of our clinical studies, all of our preclinical studies, and then our scientific data as well.
Do you ever get pulled into the contracting discussions with hospitals?
No, not really. I try and actually stay out of that. So even when somebody's like, how much is it? I immediately defer to the commercial team on those kinds of questions. I think sometimes if it is a hospital that has somebody who's really interested in learning about the data, learning about the science, or learning about why this bone graft might be different from some other categories, I'm always happy to talk to them. But I will say that doesn't happen very often.
I was going to say that may be called a surgery center or a patient, because that's the only people that'll care about.
Yeah.
Some of that maybe.
Mm-hmm.
But that kind of gets, and I wasn't sure what your answer was going to be on that, but that's kind of the frustrating thing in healthcare right now, is that your expertise, your clinical knowledge, the clinical discussion is so far removed from the contracting
Yeah.
that it really puts some of these novel devices, products out. Like there's no way to get them. And you guys are I think you're in kind of other countries. Like you're in Australia, I think,
Australia,
right?
New Zealand, parts of the Middle East, many of the countries in Europe. I think we're in 25 markets right now, including the US.
So I remember Australia had, when Infuse was recalled.
Yes.
That was a huge thing in Australia, right? At that point also they have like the MD SAP, or I guess if you're a CE mark, you can get on.
Yep.
Tell me about your process of getting into Australia.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't integrally involved in that whole process, but I will say that I've had a lot of conversations with surgeons in Australia who are using us maybe because they want a really strong alternative to the patients that they used to put BMP2 in. So they maybe have a revision, or they have, a difficult patient with multiple comorbidities, or it's a big case, and they want something that they know is really going to form bone. So that's where the MagnetOs evidence is really helpful to that surgeon group. But in terms of actually getting approval in Australia, I wasn't so much a part of that in the regulatory process.
No, it's a really interesting regulatory process. The cool thing is once you're on contract there, you can go to any hospital.
Yeah. I'm going to be there in October, actually.
Oh,
I'm going to go
nice.
to the AOA meeting. Australian Orthopedic, which is different from AOA here. But, yeah.
What in your discussions, what's the most important thing for surgeons in deciding which biologic they're going to use?
Yeah, I mean, I typically point to the fact that we have level 1 data. There are not a lot of companies that have level 1 data. I mean, we can kind of count it on one hand. It's like you said earlier, people will say, yeah, we have this great data, but then it's a rat study, or it's like a kind of a level 4 with no control group. So I usually start by just kind of talking about what companies or what products have level 1 data, and then how our study compares. And then oftentimes I start to talk about our indications, because we have really broad indications. I discuss that you don't need to mix MagnetOs with anything. A lot of surgeons are just using it by itself. Like they're not pulling in a DBM or an allograft or anything like that. They're just, if they have autograft, they're using it with autograft. Or if they don't, like if they're doing an ALIF, they just put it in. I like to talk about that. I like to talk about the handling. The handling is really nice. The putty is kind of like a granular Play-Doh, or like a granular toothpaste for the one that comes in a syringe. So people really like that. They like that it's just ambient temperature. You don't have to freeze it or thaw it. You can irrigate around it. We've done lots of testing with irrigation, and it doesn't move or migrate. So those are kind of the high points that I hit. And if it stays where they put it and it grows bone, and we have some nice data to back that up, I think a lot of surgeons are, really eager to use it and try it out.
The handling piece I can speak to from the surgeon perspective side. We have a surgeon that'll use it out on the East Coast, and once he used it, like in general, he's kind of like, oh yeah, every bio's the same, whatever. He'll like make some joke about like my kids having, polar bear diapers when he puts something in, right? But that is one of the products that he's like, I would really like that because of the handling, and it doesn't wash away. Yeah. And that was his big thing. He's like, it doesn't float, it doesn't wash away, and I can pack it into the gutters.
Absolutely.
And he mixes it. And the cool thing too is he's like, when I used to use, because he's used, and again, I don't work for any of these, but like he's used, the different osses. Yeah. And whenever he's like, yeah, I'd put blood on them. I'd mix them with something else. I'd put them in, and then 6 weeks later in a post-op image, we'd see that it would migrate, and it would migrate through the multifidus and longissimus segment, right? Yep. So like if you did a posterior lateral fusion, that's what it would look like. Is it would look like it just migrated between the muscle plane. Yeah. But that is something like he to this day is like, man, MagnetOs has the best handling of almost any biologic that he's used. Yeah, we hear that a lot. I mean, it's anecdotal, but people do love the handling. It's one of the things they like best about it. And yeah, we stand by that. It's a PEG PLA, so polyethylene glycol and polylactic acid. We keep it kind of pure. There's been some history of people trying to like hydrolyze their PEG PLA so that it can have different handling properties. But when other companies were doing that, they would put it in and it would sort of swell because it was hydrolyzed once it was implanted. So we don't do that.
We know that we have a really nice ratio. We have more than 90% of our product is granules, and then the polymer is just less than 10%. So we feel really strongly that, we have a good product that has good handling and a great polymer that, again, when you have a company founded by PhDs, they work at it till they get it right. Take a lot of feedback from surgeons.
So what do you think the future is like for Kuros? Is it they want to get sold? They want to go?
Oh, I think we should just keep acquiring cool, innovative companies and then just grow and be the company that has all the new, interesting, forward-thinking things. But for me, I don't have the full reins of exactly where we can go. But yeah, I want us to keep being innovative. I think we have a really strong platform, again, of how a surface or a material could influence a body. And I think we'll keep building off of that. I think, we talk to surgeons all the time about what they feel is missing or what they think we need to develop. And so Kuros is kind of looking at that from that perspective. I can tell you, we're not working on a DBM. We're not working on a cell-based. We're not looking to expand our portfolio to be the same as everybody else. We're looking at new ways to bring surgeons what they need and what's missing.
Something I meant to ask earlier. Can you break down, everyone will be like, oh, we have a level 1 study. I don't know what that means.
Yeah.
What's the difference between a level 1 study and that rat study that was done that was a benchtop study?
Yeah. Well, okay. So a level 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 is a human clinical study. So an animal study is a whole sort of different category. So an animal study would never kind of be a level 1 study and also wouldn't be a level 5 study. You know what I'm saying? Because it's not in humans. A level 1 study is a prospective study. So you start and then you move forward with it. You're not looking back at patients that you've already operated on. That would be a retrospective. So a level 1 is prospective, looking forward. It's randomized, meaning that it is a coin toss about what treatment a patient gets, right? Heads, they get this treatment, tails, they get this treatment. And the surgeon doesn't get to decide and the patient doesn't get to decide. They have both agreed that they're going to be part of a study where they could get randomized into either group. All right, so prospective, randomized, controlled. There's a control group. So it's not just everybody's getting treatment A, and then at the end we're going to write a paper about treatment A. It's half of the patients are randomized to treatment A, and half of them are randomized to treatment B. So there's always a control group. So the things that can make a level 1 study stronger are being multi-center. You can imagine that just kind of one surgeon doing the same thing over and over and over again is not as strong as 20 surgeons doing the same thing in a prospective, randomized, controlled manner, right? We're taking out some of the variables. Making sure that as many people as possible are blinded. So you want the patient to be blinded so that when they're giving their patient-reported outcome measures, they can't be biased in terms of, yeah, I'm feeling better because I got treatment A, or I'm not feeling better because I got treatment B.
So they don't know which one they got.
They don't know.
Okay, they could have been the control group.
Yep.
They could have been A.
Yes,
they
exactly.
could have been B.
Yep. So same thing in terms of studies like this with biologics or hardware or spine. The radiographic endpoint. So ideally, what we do is we pick an independent blinded reviewer. So we had, for our level 1 study, we had 2 independent blinded spine surgeons reading these images, and they had to look for fused or not fused. And they had really strict criteria, looking at fine cut CTs at 1 year. They had to look at the sagittal, the axial, the coronal, and they had to mark it. So they were blinded. Our surgeons were blinded as much as they could be. So they had to completely prep and decorticate the joint before they were told what bone graft was going to go where. Yeah, exactly. So they couldn't be biased, right? They couldn't kind of over prep the one that they thought was going to work better or under prep. And then, the one thing that I kind of haven't said yet is that these were independent surgeons that did this study. We gave them an unrestricted grant. So Kuros did sponsor it monetarily, but we didn't control the study. We don't have access to the patient data. We didn't write the paper, do the stats, any of it. We gave an unconditional grant so that they could do the study on their own. So we tried to keep our hands off of it as much as we could. With me, kind of eagerly wondering what's happening.
Just sitting on your hands.
Yeah, exactly. If you want to share anything, please just email me. Here's my email and also my phone number. So those are things that make a higher level study. You start to move into level 3 studies or retrospective, looking back, maybe not having an independent reviewer, all the way down to a level 5 study is just kind of a case series. Here I am, I did these 10 cases and here's what happened. And then beyond that, if there's just not enough data, then you can have the academy make a recommendation. And so that would be even, kind of a lower level.
Interesting.
And then honestly, the highest kind of level of evidence there is if you have 10 level 1 prospective randomized clinical trials, all kind of comparing the same thing. You can do a meta-analysis where you combine them all and get, sort of one outcome from all these level 1s. That's really the highest level of evidence you can find. And there's not a whole lot of that in orthopedics or spine surgery.
I feel like I'm now prepared to walk the NAS floor.
There you go. Yeah. Like, what other board questions do you want me to answer? Yeah.
No, it's funny because we hear a lot of like different terminology shouted out when you go to like these big meetings, right? Yeah. It's kind of funny. Like I've said it before that I feel like when you go on the NAS floor, I'll watch how if a surgeon's with us and walks through that floor, it's similar to like walking down the beach in Mexico. Right, where you have all these vendors coming at you, doctor, sir, you know, kind of thing. And it's just a lot of noise. And so I'm always interested to hear from the companies that have kind of broken through the noise.
Yeah, well, I mean, sometimes we run into this as well. I'm like, so we have a really nice fusion rate of 79% and up to 6-level open posterior lateral fusion with a bone graft that was not mixed with autograft. But then we might be at a booth like next door to somebody who has like 100% fusion rate. Right. But like, so a surgeon might see like that 79 versus that 100%. But what like may not be apparent right away is what that 79% means in that level 1 robust study versus this 100% maybe in a rat. Right. And so there is kind of that NAS noise that you're talking about. And it's hard. I mean, I get it. Marketers are good at their jobs.
Again, like I said, even someone who sells this stuff, it becomes somewhat white noise. What's the most effective way to sell to a surgeon in your mind?
Oh, gosh. I mean, to me, it's data. I like to see that there is good clinical evidence behind a product. But I know it's hard to get, and a lot of companies don't put the effort into that. But yeah, I want it available. I like when I have a good rep that knows what they're doing, and I don't have to dig through a tray myself.
Would you say the product or the rep is a heavier weight on the decision of what you're going to use?
The product is a heavier decision for sure, making sure that there's good data, good evidence behind the product. But I will say that there was a product that I really, really liked and I never used after their rep came to my case just one time. So it has to go hand in hand. You can't show up to an OR and not know what you're doing. And it's like, I will remember that story forever. And I do remember actually telling some of my partners about how terrible this rep was. And then they also didn't ever use that product because I was kind of like, the new guy doesn't know what he's doing. And then they weren't in a surgery center anymore. So you definitely have to know what you're talking about.
It's after COVID, it is exceptionally harder, or I should say, it is exceedingly harder to get in front of a surgeon, just because of, there's so many policies now of like, well, you can't meet with the doc, you can't meet with the doc. So I'm always curious on, from a surgeon's perspective, what makes them move, what makes them change what they're doing.
Yeah.
And in orthopedics, it's different because there's far less companies, right? For foot and ankle, there's far less companies. Right. Whereas like in spine, there's like 250 companies that make a pedicle screw.
But you still need to learn. I mean, so even for foot and ankle, it's like there's a good handful of, total ankle replacements that are on the market that people use that have some share of voice with their consumers. And yeah, I think when it comes to that stuff, you just have to show that there's evidence and the ease of use. I don't know. If I had a secret about like a back tunnel to get into a surgeon's office, I would tell you. But
if I knew, I wouldn't have asked.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for bringing this on the founders. This is awesome. You can get this in Colorado at Bevy.
That's where we got it.
That's where you guys got it at.
Yeah.
In Michigan,
you can come to Grand Rapids, and if you show up, I will take you to Founders in person.
I may take you up on that.
Okay.
I hear amazing things about Michigan. I see the ads.
Yeah, pure Michigan. It hasn't gotten you yet? No.
I would love to go.
Come in summer.
Come in the summer.
Come in the summer.
That's the key. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Sage, with Kuros. I'm not called the god of bone healing. With Kuros Biosciences.
Yep.
It's Kuros Biosciences, right?
It is, yeah.
Okay, Kuros Biosciences. I absolutely. I look forward to seeing where it goes, especially to a company that commits to excellence in one area and isn't trying to be everything to everyone.
That's us. Thank you so much for having me. This has been really fun.
Awesome. All right. Well, goodbye.